This is called the Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program, or the SLRP. It is 11 stages that are sequential, that are connected to many different psychological theories, many different ways that people have learned to provide good mental health services to their clients. It is not psychotherapy. It is a treatment program. And when I accept people into my program, I explain that this is not and will not be like any therapy you've been with. It is analogous to going to a treatment program, an outpatient treatment program that has rules and requirements. Of course, I'm still a therapist, so I'm very flexible in those. It requires active participation. It requires commitment and goal orientation. This is not a passive process, and it's not a quick fix, but it works. Depending on the client, their background, their motivation, and how often I see them, and I won't see anyone more than once a week, it lasts anywhere from 8 months to a year and a half. So it's an 11-stage model. It is the scaffolding for the Codependency Cure, and it is linear. And one of the greatest theories that had the most impact on me was Erik Erikson, his theory on psychosocial development, that you have to master the challenge of each stage in order to be ready for the next stage. And if you don't master that challenge, then you are stuck. Well, my treatment model follows that same type of thinking. Within each stage, within each level, there are a multitude of psychotherapy techniques that I use. And it would be another training. In fact, I'm writing a training now that talks about all the different tools and techniques that I use. Hitting bottom is stage one. I think someone asked me about the first step, the first stage. Stage one is hitting bottom and introducing hope. And that really is when your life is out of control. The consequences and losses build to unbearable pain. You feel defeated. You're worn out. It's a breaking point. It's when giving up feels like it's an option. When the avalanche of losses just become too hard to bear. So this is when you reach out and you find help. You don't have to do anything in stage one. You don't have to accomplish anything other than understanding that you can't just be in the pain anymore. And that is the stage people are in automatically when they come to me and start the program. And during stage one, it's important to reframe this feeling of contempt and disgust and anger and sadness and failure and exponential manifestations of core shame, is to reframe their life. That if something is impossible, then they are that one camera looking at something from one angle, and they can't see that it can be more. So during stage one, incumbent upon the therapist to describe what they can't see and make sure it is believable. This is where it's the opposite of selling anything. You want to give them explanations that resonate, have them feel that you empathize and you understand, and they might not be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you can. This is a time where you try to reframe the idea of a victim to a survivor, and that the difference between the two, and I learned this a long time ago, I'm sure it was borrowed from someone else and someone else, is that a victim is someone who doesn't want to or cannot get help, and their problems keep perpetuating, and there's no way out. A survivor accepts the problems and tries to find a solution. Now, it might not be the straight line forward, but it is someone who has in their mind this idea that they are going to survive. One of the great reframes that I found, and I think I did some research, and someone told me from his Chinese background that doesn't really mean what I think it does, but I'm going to use it because it makes a great reframe. But it's Chinese symbols for what is considered crisis. And the two symbols represent danger an opportunity. So regardless of the Chinese symbols, a crisis for someone who is a victim is danger. For someone who is a survivor, it's opportunity. You can't get help unless you seek help. And you can't seek help if you finally fall prey to all of the consequences that are endemic to the problem. So the goal at this stage is to introduce hope. Stage 2 is when you set up and explain and talk about and study everything that's in the human magnetism. Now, when my editor saw my first draft of the book, he said, well, this is like a 400, 500 page book. You've got to bring it down to 250 pages. I said, I had one of those WTF moments. And what? But I did. So it is dense with information. And just like going to one of my trainings, it's very triggering. And some people can only read a few pages at a time. There is so much information. And the way that I sell this is in the initial part of explaining the program, I am very specific and I say there is an expectation that you have read the book or you will read the book within the first month of treatment. And there are so many concepts in the book that I can't even begin to talk about right now, but they include an explanation of codependency, narcissism, the evolution of the problem, where it came from, how to solve it, the beginnings of it, the unconscious elements. There's so much information about chemistry and limerence and narcissistic abuse and power and control strategies. And this is where there is rich conversation. Stage 3 is resolving SLDD addiction. Everyone, or near almost every one of my clients, were relieved when I explained SLDD as an addiction. And I talked about that it is guided by this chemistry or relation template that, like any drug that we experimented with and had fun with, started off with this intensely euphoric experience. And then we, for reasons of self-medicating or experimentation, we would do it to feel better or take the pain away. And then I would explain that all addictions are the same when it comes to the brain's functioning, whether it's a behavioral or process addiction or a chemical addiction. It takes place in the pleasure centers of our brain with specific neurotransmitters. And we talk about how the addiction commandeers the brain and it makes decisions that override our common sense. And when you explain that to their client, they start to go, oh, I'm not so weak after all. This is a really serious problem. And they start to see why every time they tried to stop, and they were so confident that this was the time, and then something happened. The narcissist triggered them back to coming back, or they couldn't remember how mad they were. They just had this yearning to be with that person, and all of a sudden started thinking the positive things. And it's easy to sell if you have addictions background, but you don't need that to move this stage forward. When we talk about the number one withdrawal symptom, pathological loneliness, and I explain pathological loneliness as both this elemental problem, I explain it to them as a withdrawal symptom. The wheels are turning, the lights are going off. They start to go, oh yeah, it is addiction. And then we talk about their going back as a relapse. They have this frame, they have this construct to understand what is taking control of them. If anything, it helps with their shame. And the more we talk about it at this stage, the more we can prepare them for quitting. Unlike chemical dependency treatment, you go into treatment usually after you're detoxed. Well, no, you don't do that with this program. The detoxing is a part of stage 3. And I will do anything I can to tell people ahead of time what they need to know, what they need to learn, so they can be successful in the hardest parts of each stage. And when I created the 11 stages, I went from 10 to 11, I had to figure out a way to fit in gaslighting because it is pervasive at every juncture of understanding of what is SLDD. A person in a relationship with a narcissist is highly susceptible to be gaslit. And if we explain gaslighting correctly, empathically, and effectively, people start to see that there are ranges, it's a continuum of sorts to it, that it's not always as dark and sinister as the worst cases of gaslighting, but they start to see how their relationship with their narcissist has been sustained for so long because the narcissist has been able to make them think about who they really are. That's not true. But really, what got me into understanding that this has to be its own stage is, again, I have this very Ericksonian stage progression approach to this disorder. Is, okay, so once you solve the addiction, they're sober, they're in recovery, they're working their program, now you have to address how they think about themselves. And again, we have to look at functional impairment in the triage approach. Addiction had to come first. So why did I need to have this in a new stage? Well, if I describe in the human magnet syndrome that every SLD has experienced attachment trauma, and they, through this crucible of harm and ferocious abandonment, neglect, or abuse, evolved in a very pathological, negative way into a person that believes that they are only good enough and worthy if they sacrifice, if they can be invisible, if they postpone any way of or activity or any manner of happiness so they can help other people. And that has congealed into their identity, which is incredibly saddening. And it's some of the most emotional sessions that I have. Then we can understand why SLDs are so prone to gaslighting. Now, gaslighting is not in all SLD pathological narcissist relationships, but elements of it are. And so that's why I explain it in a comprehensive way that talks about the minimal impact gaslighting to the maximum, depending on where someone is. If someone has been brainwashed and their thoughts about themselves are not their own, you are not going to be able to move forward in this program. And that's why gaslighting became the next stage. Moving forward, you want to have support systems. And this is no easy task. You don't do it on Tinder or any dating app. A support system is not romance. It's not a boyfriend. As a former SLD, they think that the next relationship will take their pain away, but they don't realize they're moving from one bad thing to another. And although it's good in the beginning, it will ultimately become the same. So to proactively work on the shame, loneliness, and addiction is you have to set up a new foundation. You have to build friends or deepen the relationships that you have where they actually are loving and supportive, but they don't really know you. Stage 6 is where you prepare for the storm that happens in stage 7. If you are going to finally set boundaries with the narcissist and you know everything about a narcissistic personality disorder or these personality disorders, you know it is going to be the proverbial stuff that's going to hit the fan. So you really want to be serious about making as many friends, acquaintances, and supportive and nurturing relationships so then you can have more of a solid foundation. So I want to say this again, that once you finish this stage, just like when Erickson explains in his developmental theories, you're not done with what you learned. You now carry that into the next stage. You still might have issues with the addiction that are by far more progressed. You still might have some issues with gaslighting that's by far more progressed. You still might have issues with developing social relationships, networks, etc. But now it is about preparing for the most difficult of all stages, is stage 7. It's so important at this stage of preparation is to understand and measure levels of risk, of physical safety. It's more common than you believe that in SLD narcissist relationships, there is domestic violence. And there's all sorts of types of domestic violence, whether it's emotional, verbal, sexual, physical, triangulating the kids, poisoning the kids' minds, that you're going to plan on eventually leaving the narcissist or divorcing them, and you know that they will do everything and anything to stop you. You have to be able to predict what's going to happen. And this is what this stage is all about. Predict parental alienation. Predict friends and family minds will be poisoned. Predict that your kids will be triangulated. Predict sabotage and shaming. Because if you can predict it, then you can, in this stage, make the necessary adjustments, create strategies or personal interventions with yourself, with your kids, with your emotional health, with your financial health, and you can be one step ahead of the narcissist. But I cannot emphasize the strength of stage 6 and preparing for the narcissistic storm, because stage 7 is the storm. So this is the stage where you are prepared in so many ways because of all the previous steps to finally do what could be the hardest but not surprising part of your recovery, is start setting boundaries. And because of your ability to use observe, don't absorb, and everything else that has happened, is to watch things unfold as predicted. You might have an attorney lined up. You might have access to your bank accounts. You might have changed your email address. You will have set up everything as possible to be one step ahead of the narcissist trying to punish you, trying to make you come back and beg for another chance. A part of this stage is to create a safety net to deal with the losses. Just because you know what they are doesn't mean it's not going to hurt you. You still will be triggered. You still will be angry. You will be sad. There will be a moment in the latter part of this stage where the narcissist will be gone. And you might be alone in an apartment by yourself with your kids, or alone in the big house with your kids or wherever, and be feeling good, but you still won't have life experience with it. And that is where plain old traditional psychotherapy works wonders. This is where the wheat is separated from the chaff. That as you move past the primary relationships that immediately dissolve because of either the boundaries you set or the alliances that people make with the people that have gone away, you start to see who people really are. And in some ways, you can't really predict it as much as you think. And it's saddening. And again, I say, even if you predicted it. And if a no muscle existed, this is where you would start to strengthen it. You would start to experience the success and the feelings of self-esteem and empowerment as you say no. And you start watching other people, whether it's a waitress or a librarian, where they just have a negative reaction to a very, very rational boundary. And you start to see the narcissist everywhere. When you can introduce, and it literally is that way, the person to the child that they once were, and get them to remember that child and build a relationship with that child, and to carry forward that child, and to see the child as an individual whom they have to nurture, they have to protect. Because SLDs, our clients or ourselves, we never got that. And the only way that child, that memory of that child, can be healed is if we, the now self-love abundant person, can embrace that part of ourselves, hold their hands metaphorically through imagination, or some of my clients in a very realistic way, and to be able to bring together the child that disappeared into their lives so that they can come together. So now we are at stage 9, where you are transitioning to self-love abundance. It is my favorite part of the program. You are seeing happiness that is beyond verbal. The way people look, the way that they walk and talk, their facial expressions, there is this freedom. There is a bounce to their walk. There is a perpetual smile. They are feeling themselves that has no obstruction to any of the harm that was done to them. They are not in relationships that are entrapping them. They are not gaslit. They have self-esteem, self-love. They have friends. And you would think that stage 9 is a very simple stage. But now that you have achieved what I call self-love abundance, it means you're cured. And stage 10, you would think, again, should be easy because now you love yourself and you're ready to date. But it is challenging. As a person that is in stage 10 now, if you never rode a bike and you start riding it at age 59, you're going to fall. You're going to find you don't like this bike. You're going to set boundaries, and it won't be about narcissists. It will be about you experimenting with this self-love abundant self who is trying to find intimacy. It's not going to be littered with narcissists, but just the normal disappointments. If you were raised in a healthy family with unconditionally loving parents, you would have experienced this in high school and in college, and you would have all these memories of dating these boys and girls and doing things you regretted, but learning something. In stage 10, it's kind of like that. You start to date, but you are no longer threatened by that part of you that sabotaged the potential for healthy love or the person that will sabotage it. Stage 11, I don't have it completely figured out yet. And I'm okay with that because I write and create information, content, inspiring work, treatment protocols because I know it to be true through my own experiences as a SLD who has been in recovery, who has done the work to become an SLA, or my experiences as a psychotherapist. But this is what I can tell you.